Good morning, fellow Toastmasters. Everybody's looking good here on Zoom. I can't believe all the people. Wow, very impressive. Heavenly Father, we come to you today and ask your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin our Toastmasters meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of our community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we listen attentively to speeches and provide kind and meaningful evaluations to encourage growth in our colleagues as master speakers. Help us to conduct our work with the spirit of attentive joy and enthusiasm, and give us the desire to find ways to excel in our work together and encourage and challenge each other to reach higher and farther and to be the best that we can possibly be. We ask these things in your name, Lord, oh God, amen.
Amen. Special good morning to everyone online, and good morning to everyone here. If you could please rise. No head here, perfect. You'll be up in a minute, Dave? All right. Need an elevator? Escalator? All right.
You need a tow truck.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I guess today is as good a day to talk about how remembering to say the pledge before the meeting. I thought it was one of the things about this club that I liked, that was part of the opening, that is our identity. And that one nation under God, just one nation. There isn't right and left. There isn't big and small, brown, white, black. There's one nation. We're the United States of America. And this morning, our theme is Veterans Day, because it is Veterans Day. And in respect for that, I went and found my combat boots.
Well, you didn't go into much combat then, by the looks of them.
Right, these are they actually took them all from us because of parasites in country. Wow. They didn't want any of the soil or anything else to get back. So they actually took our boots from us and gave us new ones.
Oh, okay.
So there's an interesting fact why if you see a soldier with a lot of brand new boots, it's because you weren't at least allowed to take them at that time. So there's my interesting factoid for the day, I guess. With that, I'm going to be turning it over to our Toastmaster for the day, Mr. Steve Smith. Thank you.
As Tom stated, today is Veterans Day, and that is our theme for the day. I'm not going to eat this thing.
You almost have to.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's neither here nor there. I'll try to remember that. Because I have a tendency to let it drift down. So I will try to watch that. Now, first thing I want to ask, how many people here served in the military?
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for your service, first of all. Kind of?
Yeah.
It's not, that's like being a little bit pregnant. Either you did or you didn't.
Well, when you are the last draftee from Niagara County, and you know your knees aren't going to make it through basic, you're the first medical discharge in your training unit. But I thanked a young man one day for his service, and I told him what I just told you, and he said, "Hey, you came forward." I said, "You're right. I'm going to get one of those cards and all the benefits. Thank you."
Well, my brother and my father were veterans. My father served during World War II, and my brother during the Vietnam era. Now, my brother was smart. He was 3 years older than I am. So he came of age right at the wrong time. So he knew he was going. He went ahead and enlisted in the Army. So he had a better option of what he could and couldn't do. He wound up serving his term out at the Pentagon, waiting tables. But that was a good move. Now, when I came of age, I had a very low number in the draft. They still had the draft then. I think it was something like 14 or something. I'm sitting there. Uh-oh. That was the same year they did away with the draft. Now I took that as a sign. If they'd have drafted me, I would have gone. No questions asked. But I saw that as a reprieve, and I thank all that's holy for that. So I never did serve. But I have a lot of respect for those that do, having grown up with both a father and a brother to serve. My father was in the American Legion, so was my brother after he served. So I have had a lot of exposure to all of this. My mother's in the auxiliary. People are here that I need to be here. So let's go through this and make sure of all this, shall we? Our word master today is Dave Licata. Do you have a word for us, Dave?
Strangely enough, I do. Thanks, Dave. The word of the day is valor. V-A-L-O-R. Great courage in the face of danger. Especially in battle. Here's the sentence. The medals are awarded for acts. Thank you. One of my favorite academicians.
And it slides under the. Yeah, it slides under the bar up there. Don't mess with that. Just be. It's got the name on it, yeah.
Good. I got it.
Thank you.
I hope that's not a permanent marker.
At this point.
I agree. Okay.
Oh, I forgot to tell you about my boots. They let me go home with my boots. There's nothing Germany at Fort Dix.
Now, our master today is Dr. Gerald Stevens. Can you tell us about your duties?
Yeah. Lockport Toastmasters. I am the master of awe today, so I'm looking for awes, pregnant pauses, uncomfortable filler words in our speaking today. So hopefully we won't have filler words like a lot of shows. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Right along, our grammarian today, let's wind up, is Mike Licata. Can you tell us about your duties?
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, my job this morning will be to count the good and both poor uses of the English language. Thank you very much.
Our quote master, Chris the Glauber Banks. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster and fellow Toastmasters. This holiday is so important, it was challenging to narrow down which quotes to share to celebrate the valor of our veterans. President Abraham Lincoln said, "Honor to the soldier and sailor everywhere who bravely bears his country's cause. Honor also to the citizen who cares for his brother in the field and serves as he best can the same cause." But this Veterans Day, according to former Congressman Nick Lampson, we should do more than sing the praises of the bravery and patriotism that our veterans have embodied in the past. We should take this opportunity to reevaluate how we are treating our veterans in the present. In war, there are no unwounded soldiers, wrote Jose Naroski. And country western singer Trace Adkins for the Wounded Warriors Project said, "They served with honor, survived the battlefield, and now they've come home." For many of our wounded service members, the greatest casualty is being forgotten. And lastly, author Mary D. Brooks said, "We remember those who served, sacrificed, and endured. We don't celebrate war. We celebrate their sacrifice, their honor. Remember them, lest we forget." Mr. Toastmaster.
Now, oh, I see we're having a little trouble here, so, okay. Let's go to our timer, Nancy Ferry, I believe she's here.
Oh, do you have a line of sight on that?
Yeah.
I already tried that.
Morning, fellow Toastmasters. Today I will be your timer, listening for the right, watching for the right time. I have my little clicker and I will light up the light, and I also have my phone with my time on it. So I believe table topics are 1 to 2. There's discrepancy on the book. One says 1 to 2, one says 1.5 to 2. Is it 1 to 2?
Yes. There's official Toastmaster time, and then there's AM Lockport time,
Right.
which is 1.5.
So
2.
Yeah, so the
1.5.
yeah, you can put the yellow on at 145.
okay, 1.5 to 2. Thank you for the clarification. And most of the speeches will be 5 to 7 minutes unless I hear otherwise. And I will be also timing the evaluators 2 to 3 minutes. So try to stay on time. It's one of our boundaries that we learn in Toastmasters.
I'll be back in business. Yep. Good. So let's go to our jester, Phil Russell. Are you there, Phil? On a song? I heard him earlier.
He's having trouble unmuting.
Oh.
Okay. How about now?
Oh, yes.
You hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, guests, I didn't have the privilege of serving in this Army. Back in the Vietnam days, I volunteered, but my eyes were so bad, they just said, you're not going. My grandfather, he served in the Spanish-American War in the New York Regiment, I think with, what was that, Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. And my dad, he made planes to bomb over in Germany at one of the local aircraft places. And my son served very valiantly in the U.S. Navy flying jets over in the South Pacific. And that's my history of that. And it's happy Veterans Day. Now, there aren't a lot of good jokes to go around when you're talking about veterans. However, when you talk with the people that served, they have great stories. And I have 2 stories that are a little bit funny as far as I can tell. If you've ever been to San Diego, Coronado Island, that's where the SEAL team works out, and there's a little bar there. And the SEALs go there, pilots go there, enlisted go there. It's quite a place. They have an outdoor patio. And for some reason, nurses go there. Well, back in the day, my sister Molly, being a nurse in the Navy, she went there one day with a bunch of other nurses, Navy nurses, and they were having a great time. Beautiful day. If you've been to San Diego, gorgeous, gorgeous. They have an outdoor patio, big giant fans and that. And well, everybody was having a great time. Well, I guess my sister thought maybe not enough fun. They were drinking a pitcher of beer. Well, that pitcher was just full. Guess what went into the fan? The whole pitcher of beer, and everybody got soaked. It was quite a story. Then, Jackie, don't get mad at me too much. My good friend Kenny, when he came back from Greece, he told me this little story. I think it was 6 months out in the Mediterranean. You have to remember, Navy people can't help themselves. They're away too long, and they get a little bit crazy. And in Greece, they had a wine festival, and they were ashore on leave, and there was a wine stopping going on. Well, Kevin, Jackie will verify this, decided to join in, and in his dress whites, which then became dress purples, he joined in on the wine stopping. Like I said, Navy personnel, they just can't help themselves. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have our Tech and Gesture Master, Thomas Helwine. Can you tell us of your duties today?
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I believe we have one guest online. This morning, Chris is online again. Was he? Okay. Anyhow, Tech and Gesture Master. I'm going to be watching for anyone speaking on Zoom, whether they have a nice setup, if there's an issue with them speaking. I'm going to be watching the microphone today, seeing if everyone holds it here or if they hold it down here. And you can't hear. So I'd like to see gestures. Don't put your hands in your pockets. That's a bad thing in the military. They yell at you every time. Don't ever put your hands in your pockets. Use them. Speak to everybody. Big gestures. Facial expressions, all of that. Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster.
Now we have our Quizmaster, David Jones. Can you tell us what you will be doing?
Good morning, Mr. Toastmaster, and make sure you use my hand gestures. I'll be listening for some interesting information and tidbits from all the speakers, and at the end of the meeting, I will quiz everybody and see if they've been paying attention. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Well, that covers our job. Now, before we launch into table topics, I will start in on some of my stuff.
Can you hold the microphone? There we go. It only has a little receptor at the top.
It's directional. You have to speak straight into it.
Yeah, that's too far. There we go.
Wow.
There it is.
You can hear yourself. They can hear you.
Yes, you have to eat it.
Wow. Okay. Well, try.
Thank you, Steve.
I told you before, I'm used to the ones when we're on stage. You tape right to here. It gets put where it needs to be, and it stays there. You don't even have to think about it, which is good, because if you did, you'd drive me nuts down in the tech room.
You got 12 people in your audience on Zoom that want to hear what you have to say. You have
really? They care about what I say? Oh. Yeah. Veterans Day was originally called Armistice Day to celebrate the end of hostilities in World War I, which the ceasefire took place on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. It officially ended in June 28th of 1919, when they signed the Treaty of Versailles. In November of 1919, President Woodrow Wilson decreed that because of that, they would celebrate the armistice on November 11th. I think I omitted the fact it was November 11th, 1918 that it stopped. Treaty of Versailles was 1919 in June. In November, Woodrow Wilson declared a national holiday. Other countries celebrated as Remembrance Day. Now, in 1954, they decided to expand on that and celebrate all veterans. Now, there is a difference. We have Memorial Day, we have Veterans Day. Memorial Day is to celebrate veterans who died while in military service. Veterans Day is to celebrate anybody who served this country. So with that thought in mind, let's move on to table topics. Mike Florio.
We want to do quote master?
Did I miss quote master?
We did do that.
We did do that. I thought I did. Let's screw me up.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and I do not believe we have any guests.
We do, Chris.
We do, Chris. Good morning, Chris. When I think about Veterans Day, I think about my family members that served. I had uncles that served, 5 uncles. It was almost as if that's what you had to do when you were growing up, is that you served in the military. You just automatically did that. My father served in the military. I was lucky enough that when I graduated from high school, it was peace, which I kind of like Veterans Day because it celebrates peace. As Steve said, it's the 11th month, 11th day, and 11th hour. And that was the end of World War I. Supposedly the war to end all wars, but that worked out. Anyway, everyone knows someone and everyone has a story. Beth Banks, I'm wondering if, you could tell us who you might know and how you feel about Veterans Day.
Thank you, Mr. Table Topics. Yes, I do know some veterans. My father was a veteran. One of my uncles that I'm very close to, my Uncle Bill, he was a veteran. My dad never really talked much about it, except for he didn't really participate in World War II. When the Korean War came, he then was taken back into the service, and that's when they found out that he really didn't have the knees for the service, and they dismissed him and he couldn't serve. I actually found out from my uncle Bill that they both were in Seneca Lake. There was a barracks training facility there. They both were there at one time or another. That is kind of a creepy place, in my opinion, because it isn't really used anymore, but the roads are all there, so they go nowhere. So that's a little bit creepy, but my dad, like I said, he didn't really talk much about it, and I can thank him posthumously for his valor. Thank you.
That in there, that was great. Now, I've traveled around a little bit, but I've never really been to a battle site or one of the famous, spots where war, maybe Ground Zero.
You gotta go to Gettysburg.
I've heard friends that have gone to Gettysburg. Where else? Maybe Fort Niagara. That's really going back, okay, in the war. But we have a Toastmaster here who's a veteran and who has done some recent traveling. So I want to call up Dr. Gerald Stevens. I know he's a master, but he does have a good story. And you know what? Where have you gone recently and in your travels? And I know you've been probably to Gettysburg. Anyway, I don't want to take away your story, but come on up and share some of your travels with us.
Morning, fellow Toastmasters. Morning. I have been to a few fields of battle, and they all had a lot of valor in those battlefields. The first one is Fort Ticonderoga I'd like to talk about. I actually had a relative that was in the Green Mountain Boys a long time ago, and that was in the Revolutionary War. I've been to Gettysburg. My wife had a relative that was in the Irish Brigade who was a drummer, and they had a play-by-play when we went. It was the 150th anniversary. And one of the people that gets shot a lot is the drummer. So he sends the cadence. And also another person that gets shot a lot is a flag bearer, because they direct the troops with the flag because there's so much smoke. I never knew that until I went there, so that's interesting. But most recently, I went to Pearl Harbor. A recent trip I went on Oahu, and that was quite something. I'd like to say about Toastmasters. I had a relative that was in World War II. He's still alive in Pearl Harbor. He was on Hickam Air Force Base. He tells the story where the Japanese fighter plane was strafing him, and he was standing there pretty much ready to pass away, and the bullets came up to him, and he made a right turn. I said, well, it just must have ran out of bullets. Lucky for me. So I was like, wow, yeah, it's very lucky. And he ended up, he was a mechanic in the Air Force, and they sent him over to the Army. He ended up fighting in the Battle of Bulge as well, and he lived through it all. Quite amazing gentleman. He had a lot of valor, obviously. But in the memorial there, they take a boat out, and the Arizona is still there, and they still have oil coming up from the Arizona, and a lot of people are buried there, just buried alive at the time. But what is interesting, they show in the videos, is people that lived through it there in the Arizona, they sometimes have their ashes buried with their shipmates. So that was really moving, I thought. And there's a little more to that, but I'd like to say thank you, all veterans out there and past and present. Mr. J. Postmaster.
Can we get the light back? There you go. Thank you very much. Now I want to try something. I haven't really ever been here and tried to grab somebody off online. So Chris Nesser, I'm not sure our guest. If you are bait, unfortunately, and I would like to know from you. I mean, do you have any experiences with being a veteran or off to war or anything that you'd like to share with us this morning?
Nothing. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Great. Nothing personal. I did not serve. My family historically from the other side of the ocean, so no local service here. But as I was hearing the stories here, I think back to some of my friends who served more recently in the Middle East and some of the stories they brought back, both good and bad. And the takeaway that I had is we, especially on Veterans Day, we think of the valor of those who serve their country, who are willing to sacrifice everything in service of their fellow citizens. And I'm struck by, though we put them up on this pedestal rightly for their service, they're ordinary people. They have families, they have things that they hold dear, and the impact their service has on their family members, on themselves, through injury, through trauma, for the rest of their lives. And ultimately, the way they're sometimes treated here when they return is unfortunate and certainly deserving of more attention, to thank them truly and appropriately for the valor they displayed in the service they gave in honor of their country.
Thank you.
Can we get a timers report?
Indeed. Oh, the light is still on, just for me to remember not to talk too long. All three speakers seem to have met their time well. Beth 116, Gerald Stevens 211, and Chris Nesser 131.
Maybe.
How can I get a word master report? How did they do?
Mr. Toastmaster, we've been presented with an incredible teaching moment. We had two speakers. The last two speakers used the word twice, valor. But Mrs. Banks, she knows her stuff because she was the most dramatic. She saved it for the end, which in my view, kind of outweighs the use of twice by the other people, just because I'm a bit theatrical. But she used the word valor, took a bow, the spotlight came out, and the curtain closed. It was great. It was great, Mr. Toastmaster.
Indeed. Yes, thank you. So you can vote for Beth, Dr. Gerald, or Chris for best table topic of the day. And I need to back up. I forgot a couple of things. First of which was to offer a toast to anybody who ever served this country, all veterans.
Even my 6 weeks.
And secondly, before I get in trouble, I need to introduce our general evaluator, who today is Jill. And I also need to thank her heavily for helping me put this together. So Jill, tell us what you're going to do today. I mean, what you're going to do today.
Well, Mr. Toastmaster, I think I can already ding you for forgetting me at the beginning. My job is to evaluate you as Toastmaster, and to evaluate our evaluators. So we'll see how everybody does. Thank you.
Okay. Now, one little bit of interest, the last World War veteran, World War I veteran to die was a man named Frank Buckles, who died on February 27th, 2011, at the age of 110.
2011, wow.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I found that. Now, World War I was extreme, brutal, yeah, extreme by any stretch, any way you want to measure it. 8.5 million combatant deaths, 13 million civilian deaths. And also, directly as a result of World War I, that led us right into the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. Which killed millions of, yes, you're right, it killed millions of people. I don't have an exact number on that, millions of people. So the impact was mighty. It ended practically all monarchies that existed at the time and empires. The only one that survived was England, Great Britain. They're the only one that have a monarchy in place. All the rest of them went away as a result of the war. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was a very contentious issue. Woodrow Wilson wanted to just, settle it without a lot of revenge, if you will. France wouldn't hear of it. So because of their insistence and other countries that Germany be published or punished for starting the war, that led a little over 20 years later to World War II directly, because they didn't take that very well. And a certain person took advantage of that. He was very young and he served in World War I. Somebody named Adolf Hitler. He rose to power on that very theme. He worked on the hatred of the German people for the rest of the world over World War I, and that started World War II, quite simply. But let's get into our speaking program, shall we? I can get back to some of this. Our first speaker today is Marty Johnson, who will be evaluated by, let me see here, Carol Ann Halstead.
Marty is working on the high performance leadership, and he will tell us the purpose and apply his leadership and planning knowledge to develop a plan. And the first speech concerning this will introduce his plan and vision. And you have his title.
Well, I do. He calls it my HBL project, plan and vision. Marty Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests, one of them being Chris Nesser. Good morning, everyone. My plan and vision. Some of you may have heard me talk about this project before. It's fairly near and dear to my heart because it's a project that I've been working on pre-COVID, and it's work related. So it's a real world opportunity for me to learn and apply my Toastmaster skills. It all started in 2019. I was asked by my district manager, Joe Barreca at the time of Tops Markets, the Perna franchise, if I would undertake some great valor to go down into the battle zone of South Buffalo. South Buffalo. It wasn't that bad. It's not as bad. The people in that neighborhood on Seneca Street are very nice, and they gave me a paycheck every week for working there, so I thank them. The project that I talked to Joe, I said, Joe, I'm involved in Toastmasters, and one of the projects eventually that we all have to undertake is called the High Performance Leadership Project. And it's a fairly lengthy project. There are anywhere between 5 and 6 speeches altogether, projects that you have to present what you learned and use leadership skills, define leadership skills, and use those throughout your project, and then report on them in different segments. And the one that I chose, it's the one that I'm working on, the first one to present before my club. It's defining the plan and the vision. When I approached Joe, he said, I have something for you. Why don't you see if you can do anything with the shrink? And you've heard me talk about this before on a different project, and I'm following up on that. Hopefully I can say post-COVID pretty soon. And the project involved reducing the shrink. And that was his vision and his mind, because I'm sure the owners of the franchise wanted the shrink percentage to decrease, because then they would be making more profit. In a nutshell, the shrink percent was 2.21%, which you might think 2% isn't a lot. However, means something, and that 2% could be used for other things and other improvements throughout the store, throughout the company, perhaps wages for employees. As I mentioned, today I'm going to talk about the vision and the plan. So I revamped his vision a little bit, and I molded it into my vision. And learning about the leadership skills, I took a little assessment in the project. You have to take an assessment and you identify some leadership skills where you may need some work. And it's on a rated scale, a numeric scale. And the two that I wanted to focus on that I scored lower on were directing and developing. So developing, how can I help with this project and develop new employees, some of the newer clerks? And I said, well, we can get them involved. And that's what we did. I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what we did. We had this binder. It was actually quite a bit bigger than this. It was a binder. And we would print out the report of what we were supposed to receive and the frozen food shipment for that shipment. And we would actually go back to the basics. I'm sure many of you have heard about going back to the basics in your jobs and doing basic things that you're supposed to do. And sometimes they go by the wayside. Well, I like to focus on the basics. So that's what we did. We were counting everything that came in, we would count. And if it didn't match, we were supposed to get 10 boxes of Tops peas, and we didn't get any, or we got 5, we'd make a note of that. And we'd go through the whole invoice, and that would add up. That would add up to shrink if we didn't get it. And we would then give it to the store manager, and she would process the shortage. And we did that over a 6-month time period at the store. So that was my revamped vision of what the district manager wanted done, to come up with a way to find out about the shrink. And that's one of the main things that we did. And I will get into more detail in later presentation. The plan was to bring to fruition, if you will, the vision, which was to reduce the shrink. And that was one of the main things that we did, was getting back to the basics and actually physically counting the merchandise that came in. And it was nice. The nice takeaway for me in my learning experience, that the direction and the development that I was trying to increase and try to become better at directing people and setting them goals for them. This was one of their daily goals, to this task, to develop them. This one young stock clerk, who's a very great guy, his name is Alex, and I think it gave him a challenge. Instead of just throwing up stock, he would have a challenge, and he was involved in a little managerial task. And he was helping the company. He was actually, in the long run, he was helping the company be more profitable. And fellow Toastmasters, I know, and I encourage you that you are Toastmasters, and at some point you have to take upon yourself the task of the High Performance Leadership Project. And I'm sure you have some ideas in your head what you could do. Why not go online and read up on it and get a notepad and start jotting some projects down that you could work on? And if you ever need any assistance, let me know, or let any other fellow Toastmasters know, because not only do I have to work on the plan and the vision, eventually I have to create a group, a committee, a guidance committee. And Steve Smith and there are a couple other people that I had asked pre-COVID to be on my guidance committee. With that said, I'm going to hopefully regain some valor and attack this project the best I can. And I'll be reporting back very soon, and I will let you know how close we came to the goal and what the stats were with the reducing the shrink and the percent. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Is this on? Okay. Our second speaker, and I'm not sure if he's here, is Mark Campus. Is he out there? Mark Campus?
He's online.
He is online. Good. He will be evaluated by Thomas Moran. Can you tell us what he will be speaking on today, Tom?
I certainly can, Mr. Toastmaster. One thing before I do that, how are the lights going to work for Mark?
I'll do that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Dave? Okay, thank you. Mark is doing a presentation mastery, Connect with Storytelling. It's from the Pathways program. The title of the speech is Going Greyhound, and it's 5 to 7 minutes. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Mark Campus, Going Greyhound.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. Good morning. So after 2 decades of talking about it, I finally finished a room in my basement, my own man cave, if you will. And in an effort to personalize the space, I hung a bunch of items around it. And being the typical guy, most of those items either involved sports, music, or beer. But recently I had a guest over that questioned me about the significance of one of the signs in particular, and that was a Greyhound bus sign. Now in today's world, it's sort of difficult to imagine, but there was a time a few decades ago where bus travel in this country was a lot more popular and a lot more common. And during that period of time, Greyhound, I think, was arguably one of the truly iconic American brands. But it's more than that. You see, my dad worked for and retired from Greyhound bus lines. And given the day, I should mention that he was also a U.S. Army veteran during the Korean War, served in an anti-aircraft unit, and had the incredibly good fortune of remaining stateside and never having to ship out to Korea. But after his military service in the early 1960s, he went to work for Greyhound bus lines as a driver. And he used to transport passengers from city to city. He used to tell us stories about driving the old iconic scenic cruiser buses, those double-decker buses that were built in the 50s and lasted well into the 60s. My older brother, who was 9 years my senior, used to go to work with Dad and would ride the bus with him, taking some of these trips. But by, say, around 1974, it was now my turn. See, my older brother became a teenager, interested in other things, didn't really matter to him anymore. And I got to go to work with Dad and take some of these trips. And this was quite a common thing through pretty much all my summer breaks, but even during the school year, on weekends, I would go to work with him. Now I gotta say, you know, in PS 63, Queens, public school 63, no other kid had as exotic a lifestyle as this guy, going from city to city. If you think of the movie A Bronx Tale, where Robert De Niro was the bus driver and his little son would ride the bus with him, it was just like that, which is one of the reasons why I guess that movie resonates so much with me. I absolutely loved it. We would take the subway into Manhattan. We would report to this mammoth Greyhound bus garage on the Hudson River, which smelled one part like garage with the fumes of diesel fuel all over the place, and then one part car wash as they would be cleaning the buses and prepping them to be redeployed. We'd spend time in the driver's room where the drivers would prepare to take their trips and they would fill out their logbooks. And I had my very own logbook. I learned how to fill it out just like Dad, so I could chart out my day, how much time was driving, how much time was waiting, and so on and so forth. And there was always a real sense of adventure because Dad never really had the seniority to have a common or a set run from city to city. He would literally be on a list, and they called it the board, where they would call the drivers in pretty much any time, day or night, to come into work, and he never really knew where he was going. It would be anywhere in the Northeast or Mid-Atlantic, something that would be drivable from New York City. And for me, this was just the most awesome thing. We didn't know where we were going. We were going someplace different. And I got to see so many cities, although it was sort of limited to bus terminals, hotels, and diners. I was still in all those cities, which was a pretty cool thing. We'd go out, we would get assigned our newly cleaned bus. Dad would let me start it up, which as a little kid, I thought was the coolest thing. Picture this tiny little child with his thick glasses on, starting up these mammoth buses and just having a great time. I'd settle into my favorite seat, which was always the front seat, not the one right behind the driver, but the other seat where you had the full view of the open road. But I have to mention that I was never allowed to occupy a seat that could have gone to a passenger. And it actually happened on numerous occasions where I'd have to sit on the bar, as Dad used to call it, which was a little partition next to the driver with a metal bar on it. I actually sat on that for some of these trips. Really not the safest thing in the world, but hey, in the 70s, there weren't a lot of things that were truly safe. We would head over to the Port Authority bus terminal, and we would then head on our way to visit all of these different cities. I used to enjoy spending time talking to Dad on the bus, talking to other passengers. I was a lot more sociable then. I didn't mind talking to other people. Now, if I'm traveling, I really don't want to talk to you. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. But in any event, killing the time was never a problem. I'd always have a whole stack of Marvel comics or maybe a Mad magazine, which was another popular thing in the 70s to keep me occupied. And it was always a lot of fun. As I mentioned, we got to see a lot of cities in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. My favorite trips were always the long distance ones, which were typically red-eye type trips. They would leave late at night, say 11, 12 o'clock, going to places like Buffalo, Cleveland, and maybe Montreal. Montreal was by far my favorite trip to take. Imagine this, you're in another country. Customs didn't bother me. And they spoke French there. How cool was that? But in the end, by 1980, it all came to a stop because Dad was moved into a different job. He had had a heart attack, so they had moved him into a job that was deemed less stressful, a dispatch job. I don't know about that. Plus, now I was heading into my teenage years and my interest started to wane. We had a bit of a swan song in 1986 where I spent a summer working as a baggage man for Greyhound in Manhattan, and Dad was still working there, and we got to spend some time together, which was fun. But shortly thereafter, he retired, and sadly, in 1997, he passed. We had a really strong relationship. I most fondly remember those particular days. And even to this day, if I see a Greyhound bus on the road, I am taken back to that very simple, very happy time. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Our third and final speaker today is Jen Zappa. She will be evaluated by Jackie Kenny. Can you tell us what she's going to talk about?
I will be happy to, Mr. Toastmaster. Jen is going to be giving us her second speech in the Develop Your Vision tab. 5 to 7 minutes. She'll be telling us a little bit about her vision and plan, giving us humorous, informational, or perhaps some other style of a speech. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Jen Zappa. Oh, I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. Jen Zappa, where are you here? Goals. Goals.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, fellow Toastmasters. Goals. How much does everyone like setting goals? Can I see a raise of hands? Is anyone really happy to set goals? Okay, there are a few people, but I noticed there aren't that many of you. Goals. I haven't in the past particularly enjoyed setting goals. Let me just say that, particularly when they're work-related goals, it just feels like a thing you have to do. But what I've learned from Toastmasters is that sometimes as you build your skills and you start to grow a little more, you start to enjoy things you had no idea you were even interested in. And this project I found more exciting than I probably should have, because several months ago, I gave another speech related to a communication plan. It was actually a completely different level. And what I decided to do out of that plan was to try to hold myself accountable in some way. Now, if you read anything about productivity or self-help, there's all these different ways to set goals and to keep yourself accountable, to track things, and all these areas of your life you're supposed to focus on. And quite honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. But if you do read those types of books or you follow anyone who talks about them, what you might notice is that every single person actually does it a little bit differently. And so I think a lot of what makes someone able to accomplish goals or set those goals and track them well is finding a way that works for them. So when I got to this project, I was excited because I had actually already been doing all of the things in the project leading up to it simply by accident. So like I said, several months ago, I had to set goals as part of my communication plan with myself. And this has developed into a spreadsheet, an entire, not just one spreadsheet, but several tabs within the same document in order to do it. And it started just as keeping track of things I was doing, but a lot of other things came out of it. So I realized that I needed to tie my goals back to something that spoke to me. And that actually was a vision that I developed for myself. And although I don't necessarily have all the words in the vision, it was really like what I want to do. So one of the words in my vision is explore. That's something I want to do. It's something I want to be a part of my life. So how am I doing that? In what ways do I want to do that? That goes into my little handy dandy spreadsheet. And every week when I'm sitting down and making up what I want to accomplish, I'm looking at those high level goals and tying them back to one another. How does, going out to dinner, that's an exploration. Is it a new restaurant? All of these little things, they seem somewhat insignificant, but when you start to make these connections in your life, you start to see the ways that you actually are accomplishing the things that you want to do. Now, another element of my spreadsheet is to focus on different areas. So the areas that I work on are health, relationships, and vocation. So not necessarily career, it could be something that you volunteer for, something that you're passionate about, but it could also be career. There might be other areas that someone else would be interested in, like finances or spirituality. So whatever is important to you is important to focus on in your life. So when I sit down every week, I look at those areas that I want to focus on, and I ask myself what I need to get done in the week and how those things are fulfilling those areas of my life and how they tie back to goals. All of that already seems like a lot, I know. It's not as intimidating as it might sound, but the most important part for me is not making the list of goals. It's actually looking at it at the end of the week and saying to myself, did I accomplish this? Now, I'm a project manager in real life, so I track it with a red, amber, green, but you could track it in all different kinds of ways. Did I accomplish this? Did I kind of accomplish this, or did I not accomplish it at all? When I track that, I also ask myself a couple of questions every week. What worked? What didn't work? And what got in the way? Why didn't it work? Right? Because if we are able to identify what's working and what's not working, maybe it's a matter of shifting. Maybe what we thought our priorities or focus should be aren't actually what they are or what they should be. But maybe there's something really specific that got in the way for a good reason. Maybe our priorities shifted because of an emergency, or maybe they just shifted because of life. But whatever it is, being able to understand why something's working and why it's not working has been really helpful to me. And most importantly, has been actually seeing all of those little green marks. They're not green every week, I assure you, but seeing that I'm accomplishing these little tiny small steps to work toward my goals has actually been really motivating for me, because I tend to not give myself much credit for anything. Oh, I haven't done this giant thing that I set out to do at the end of the year. But now I can say, okay, well, here are the steps I took. This didn't work. How can I shift? How can I change focus? And what did I do? How have I moved forward? Because I think those are the things that we often forget to credit ourselves for. This has been a really interesting and fun journey for me. And I've actually been tracking my goals now for almost a year. I think it's about 31 weeks. I keep track of the number of weeks that I've tracked them for. And I found it really empowering and helpful for me in my personal life. If anyone else is interested in setting goals, I'm happy to walk you through my process. However, I know that your process might be different for you. So if you need something different, I completely understand. Fellow Toastmasters, setting goals and accomplishing things feels great. So I highly recommend giving it a shot. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Can I get a times report on our speakers?
Marty Johnston, 723. Mark Campo, 722. Jen Zapla, 647. It looks like all three of our speakers qualified on the level of time here.
Thank you. So you can vote for Marty, Mark, or Jen for best speaker of the day. I have one other thought to leave you with. I mentioned 8.5 million people were killed. Combatants were killed. That isn't even talking about the millions who were injured. Horrendous injuries. They were blinded by mustard gas. They had literally parts of their bodies blown off. They were in terrible shape. And that's just the physical. The mental injuries, well, at the time they called it shell shock. The total breakdown, just overcome by the horrors of war. I believe it's referred to now as post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, George Carlin felt that that was trivializing the injury, make it sound minor, like something it wasn't a big problem. Well, it was a big problem. It would destroy your life. And I'm quoting George Carlin, maybe we should go back to calling it shell shock so that people get some of the help that they need. So let's move on to our evaluators. Our first evaluator, evaluating Marty, will be Carol Ann.
Of course, I will be forwarding this to Marty. Marty is an experienced speaker. He moves around well and engages with the audience. He moves, his gestures are very good. And he gives us some information like we wouldn't think too much about what goes on in Tops. We just run in and get our groceries, but it brings us into more what really happens in a grocery store. And I think with him, the fact that he brings in ancillary personnel to help, which means everyone feels their job is important. The only thing he did use "and" quite a bit as a connecting word. And he did have a few restarts. I had spoken to him prior to this, and he said lately he's found himself doing that. And he did continue to have some, but on the whole, Marty just speaks so well, and no matter, maybe it's not a subject we're real interested in, but with his animated delivery, he always brings us into it. Mr. Toastmaster.
Our second evaluator will be.
With the cold water.
Am I interrupting?
No, we're not.
Our second evaluator will be Tom Moran, who will be evaluating Mark Campbell. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I'm curious as to whether the screen in the in-person meeting goes to full screen when the speaker talks. I think that would be important. I don't know if it does that or not, but it's important for someone who is giving a virtual speech from a virtual location. I love the speech this morning, Mark. I have to, I don't know, just congratulate you, I guess, on a wonderful story. Personally, you took me back to my relationship with my father and things that we'd done. It was very, in a way, romantic. The whole story about doing things with your father, and you did it in such a way that a lot of people, when they speak, they talk about that you paint a picture. I got the impression, not so much that you painted a picture, you actually did something like more or less a video or a reel. When you were speaking, I was actually there. I was on the bus. I sat on the bar. I could smell it. I could hear the engine start. I could smell the gases in the. It was very well done. I don't know what to comment on that you could improve on this. I guess I really don't know. Your vocal variety was very good. You used things like iconic and interest waning. I thought that was nice. Your eye contact was excellent. A lot of people, when they speak on Zoom, tend to look down or look at notes or whatever they're prepared ahead of time. But you had this all going on in your head, so you didn't need the notes. You just went off the cuff sort of a thing. Gestures were good. And the audience awareness was excellent, I thought. I don't think there was anyone here in the audience, either virtually or at the meeting, that had any negative comment. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you out with some improvement. Maybe if some individuals in the audience or on Zoom have some ideas for Mark, you could help him out, but I simply can't do it. I can't come up with anything. I'm racking my brain. So thank you very much, Mark. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Our third and final evaluator today will be Jackie Kenny, evaluating Jen Zapla.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. I like Jen's opening. She asked for a show of hands. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you have a spreadsheet for your life? Your life? What? She has a spreadsheet for her life. Okay. Do you doubt that Jen has goals? I think we all recognize that she has goals. She works on her goals on a continuing basis. And I think her employer is very lucky to have her. I also think that someone might be lucky to have her as a life coach. One suggestion I might have is to lower your camera a little bit, Jen. I don't think you need to stand up. Personally, I prefer it when people are seated and we see their whole face and we can really see all their facial expressions. When you stand up, you're moving back and you become quite small and it's a little more difficult to see you. But if you lower your camera a little bit, we'll get less of your living room wall and more of your body and be able to see your hand gestures a little bit better. I can't think of anything else that I would do to improve this speech. Your language is always exceptional. Your diction is very crisp and clear. We never have anything muddled or difficult to understand when you're speaking. And you always give us at least a few laughs, Jen, which I certainly appreciate. So thank you for serving with valor this morning and giving us a speech that is definitely one to be reckoned with and very nicely done. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Can we get a timer's report on our evaluators?
Evaluators also were right in the time frame. Carol Ann, just barely 144. Pomeran 233 and Jackie Kenny 207.
Okay, so you can vote for Carol, Tom, or Jackie as best evaluator of the day. Now, I have one final thought to leave you with while you're voting. Today is Veterans Day, where we celebrate the importance of America's veterans all of America's veterans, for their bravery, sacrifice, and the love of their country. So thank them for their service today. And with that, I'll call up the general evaluator, Jill, to rake me over to evaluate the meeting.
Rake him over the coals. We have fires at our house on a regular basis, so maybe I could rake him over some coals. Yes. Kind of hard to evaluate this in some ways because I have an inside line. As Toastmaster, Steve waited until Tuesday to send out anything to the general membership, which is probably a little bit slower than most people prefer. And I know because of that, some people did not respond. Maybe they never would have responded. Who knows? At the beginning of the meeting, as Artie has noticed, he forgot about introducing me as general evaluator. He corrected his mistake. I see him grimacing over there. He's going to pay for that one. But of course, he does have the vehicle keys right now. So I have to be a little bit careful here. I imagine somebody here would drive me home if it really came down to it. Yeah.
Get you there first so you watch out.
Except I didn't bring my keys at all, so I can't even get in the house. Nice thought there. Okay. Very well management of the meeting. Steve is not a DTM by title, but he has been at it long enough that he knows what's going on and keeps the pace going. A lot of good filler material, well researched. Quite a bit of stuff we didn't know. A lot of the relation to the World War I, which that's where Veterans Day originated from. He kept the pace going all the way through. The one thing I did not notice in his filler material, he mentioned that the only monarchy still existing is Great Britain, where there are quite a few that are still in existence. I know, I think Finland, or one of the Sweden, I think it is. Netherlands. Spain has one. Monaco, probably the most powerful and threatening one is Saudi Arabia. That's still in a monarchy system, even though we don't think of as kings and queens, they're sultans and as to our evaluators, they all did an excellent job today. They all had a challenge evaluating DTMs who all did a good job with their speakers. Interesting that Carol Ann, the least experienced of evaluators, actually was the only one who came up with ways to improve. I thought that was interesting, Carol Ann. Good job.
More. She had more than
Yeah. And other than that, as far as trying to evaluate the evaluators, that's just as hard as trying to evaluate the speakers today. They all brought good features of all the speeches. They talked about what the speakers did well, what speakers didn't do well, which wasn't much. And with that, I am going to give it back to our Toastmaster for reports, other than mine.
I think. I was referring to the end of World War I, all of the monarchies and empires that went away. A lot has happened in the 102 years since the end of World War I. So while you had a fair point there, it wasn't 100% accurate. And I'll probably hear about this too. So let's get into reports before I dig myself a deeper hole. We'll save the word master for last. So let's hear from our master, Gerald Stevens.
Morning again, fellow Toastmasters and our guests. I was not the most attentive today. I'm still on island time, but I did have a few ahs I did notice. Nancy had a restart, a so, and an ah. Bill had a ah. Beth had an ah, and Marty had a little bit longer and. And then after that, I snoozed. That's my report, Mr. Toastmaster. To be true.
Okay.
Hey, got it.
Sure. Next up is our grammarian, Mike Licata. How did we do with our grammar today?
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our guest this morning. There's a lot of descriptive language in our speeches. I really liked Exotic Lifestyle from Mark, Just Like Dad. Jen, you did a great job explaining the mundane and making it descriptive, so good work on that. I like Carol Ann using the word ancillary. Tom painted a picture is always good. But some of the things that I did catch this morning is our new crutch word, and it always isn't really new, but we like to use "and" as a connector. So I just think that with the ability to go back and rewatch the speeches on Zoom, maybe just count the "ands" in each individual speech if you'd like to, just something to look for, something that we're doing a little bit too much of. It is okay to take a pause and collect your thoughts instead of just using "and" as a connector word. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. Next up is our tech and gesture master, Tom Hillwine.
I'm at the cafe right now.
No, it's all right. Coffee's important.
No, I was just cleaning up my coffee cup, being a good steward. All right. First thing I want to say, as far as tech and gesture master, is I miss props. I really do. I wish I had seen at least one today. I think I missed it. If you did, I apologize, but I'm sad. I'd like to see props. Like when you make the effort to bring something in person, or you have something, just pick it up. It's like show and tell. It's like show and tell. You know, I like that part of school. I used to run back home if I forgot. All right. A lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, phone and chat wise. I like to see that for the tech part of it. I got to actually see part of that today. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that you don't get to do. So I'd like to congratulate our tech people. Thank you for solving all the issues. All right, moving more into the speakers and the gestures. For our table topics, Beth with one hand was still able to do the in and out hand gesture. Even, you know, you're stuck with one hand. I didn't notice anyone transfer it, like to go to the other hand, but I was looking for that. For Chris, excellent job. He's online there. He had a setup that's very clearly on par with most people you'll see on YouTube or anyone else. I mean, he had the headphones on. There was no audio issues. He had the blur background on. Excellent job as far as being an online person. I thought he was a little small, but that's neither here nor there. Let's see. Marty used the headset, and he did it very well. He used his hand as a clipboard. I don't even know how he did that, because he had the headset on. He was able to do that. He jotted with his air pen, to give us that kind of look. And one of the most important things I saw tech-wise, he didn't use any notes. Now, a lot of our members, they online, they may have had their notes up near the camera, but you clearly could see in person that he didn't have any notes. So I wanted to give him that. Mark, at this point, I'm like an old car, and I, take a little while to warm up and get going. You got me with the Alien 4, this guy reference, because there's a joke that what has one eye, this guy. So that was awesome. No one had any improvements for you. I'll have one improvement for you. You were like 6 seconds away from going overtime. So there's your one improvement wise. I didn't want you to get away with none. Jen, your evaluator, I would call it stolen honor. She basically took every single one of my notes. So excellent job, Jackie, on the evaluation. You covered all the tech and gesture stuff. So did you get that one? Dave? Okay. Okay.
What's your name?
Thomas, I loved your background, but your hands were a little distracting. If you're not going to be doing a hand gesture, just wriggling your hands in front of you the whole time was kind of a little distracting. Jackie, during your evaluation, your smile, more than anything, conveyed, your personality and how happy you were, and basically was like a little ray of sunshine. That's basically my report for that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about veterans. Veterans, that come home. Now, this may be a little cognitive dissonance. I only hear what I want to hear. But the ones I've talked to in my own personal experience, the PTSD that was mentioned, or shell shock or being on high alert. On average, just so you know, that takes about twice as long as they were in these situations. So if they were there for 6 months, it takes a year. If they were there for a year, it takes 2 years for that to go away. That's just your survival instinct kicked in, parts of your brain turned on that normally aren't. It just takes a little bit of time to get over that. For me, I was only actually in country for 4 or 5 months, active fighting for 10 days. But when I got home, I slept on the front couch near the front of the house. And I stayed awake all night long until my dad got home because he worked night shift at like 4 or 5 in the morning to get home. And I'd finally go to sleep and sleep till noon. That lasted for months. I was on guard duty in my house, living with my parents. Well, it finally went away. But my father, who was a veteran, understood it. Just let me do it. Eventually, he had a talk with me. He said, okay, you don't need to do guard duty anymore. We're good. No one's coming for us. So with that, I want to hand it back for more evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, time to see if we've been paying attention. Time to call on our quizmaster, David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. And before I start, I just want to say, it's kind of a side thing. I'm so happy that I joined AM Lockport. When I joined, I knew I was going to have to raise my standards because of the number of DTM and advanced Toastmasters. But the other advantage was being president of my club. I'm taking lessons on how to run a club properly, proper procedures, and Smedley sins, and I'm sharing those with my club to improve it, as well as being area director of the 4 clubs I manage. Therefore, I'm learning on 2 different levels being part of AM Lockport. So thank you for letting me be a part of the club and transferring it to other clubs. Now, I found one of the questions is, during the pledge, I found out that one person did not get the memo because only one person has a hat on today in the meeting. And does anybody know who that is? I think I'm the only one on Zoom or in person. And Steve's brother was in the Army. What was his job in the Army? Right, he's a waiter at the Pentagon, right. And Dr. Stevens had a relative who was actually working in the military at Pearl Harbor. And how did he survive from being killed?
Ran out of bullets.
Plane ran out of bullets. And which iconic American company did Mark's father work at and retire from?
Greyhound.
Greyhound. Awesome. I spent a lot of time on Greyhound. And finally, Jen, what was one of her main visions or goals that she has that she works on a regular basis? Exploring, yes. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Now it's time to find out how the word of the day did. Mr. Licata, how did Valor do?
Okay. Hang in there, babe.
I'm going anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. From the start of the meeting to the end of table topics, the word was used 7 times. Chris Banks, Phil Russell. We had a situation where in table topics it was used 5 times. After table topics, we rang in with another 4, which isn't really too bad. So I want to congratulate you on that. My friend Mark Campos did not use the word. And he also failed to mention his father's dear friend, Ralph Cramden. I'm sorry. I'll help myself out.
Well, now I'll call up our president to come back and give out the awards and close out the meeting.
Thank you. Excellent job. A hand for our table talk, or Toastmaster. I was giving you a way out. Oh, okay.
No, get out.
Well, no, you don't. You can stay if you want to. Would you like to stay with me? That's fine. That's fine. We'll be here.
I thought I would.
Okay, excellent.
I don't bite. I've had most of my shots.
All right. So first is our awards. For best table topics, the winner is our guest, Chris Nasser. Our speaker for today, who did have only one fault that I could find, it was Mark Campos. Do this, so we'll leave this for the evaluator of the day, which was Jackie Kenny.
Last three numbers, 099.
099. All right. Don't forget to put your stubs into the, put your name on them. Second chance. There you go. Yes. It's kind of jam full, but you get your dues paid for, so that's going to be a good thing. Phil is still online.
Yeah.
Yes.
Toastmaster next week. Did you want to tell us your theme, or you don't have one yet?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
My theme is going to be, of course, Thanksgiving, because we won't meet on Thanksgiving. That'll be easy. I do need to verify that Tracy Farrell will be a speaker. I need a second speaker. Is Mike Licata ready to speak up as the alternate speaker? If not, I can fill in unless there's somebody else that wants to, because I have a speech I'm doing for my pathways. And the theme is Thanksgiving. And I do need an evaluator because, Katie, who is our number one speaker? It's another Banks. Oh, I forget her name.
Christine is available.
Christine?
Or we can wait for your icebreaker.
No,
Not yet? Okay. All right.
Still working.
Get it over with.
All right. And Katie's coming up because she knows I'm going to hand her off the microphone.
Are you all set?
Okay, since it is 8:32, let's make this quick. Phil, did you hear Nancy is in? She has signed up on the website already. So take a look again at that and we are good to go. Christine will wait and do her icebreaker another time. And I have two quick announcements. I did send emails out. The officer training is this Saturday or Tuesday. You officers take a look at your email. And our officer meeting for November is next Wednesday night. But after that is social hour for everybody. So that'll be at the penalty box. The meeting is at 6. Our social hour will be at 7 on Wednesday night of next week. So if anybody wants to catch up or chit chat, we'll talk about hybrid and moving forward, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have any questions, let me know. And then Chris, just very briefly, because we'd like to wrap up, we would like to hear from you again. You said hello last week and that you were in North Point before. How did you like our meeting? I'm looking at the screen, although I should be looking at the camera so that I can kind of make eye contact. Chris, the table's yours for a moment. How did you like our meeting today? And will we see you again next week?
Yes, I plan to reach out to Jill here to kind of restart my membership. As I mentioned last week, really awesome to be a part of a meeting with a lot of contribution, well attended, great speakers today. So looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris. So we'll see you all next week. We'll take the week off for Thanksgiving and keep going after that. And back to Mr. President to adjourn. Meeting adjourned. Stay on Toasties. If you want to stay on Zoom, you are welcome to chit chat.
Wait, now that it's over, just to share with the in-person audience, University of Buffalo made national news this week because there's a committee at UV to get rid of Thanksgiving. I'm so proud.
Oh my goodness.
Jackie, did you want your ribbon?
No, thank you. No.
University of Buffalo's got a committee.
As a holiday
Terrible races. Right, and that's when I wrote it down.
Oh, no, I was. I thought it was afterwards. There were no students.